One of the things that I have really enjoyed is kind of the idea of, build it and they will come sort of idea, right?
Right.
Instead of kind of going off and chasing the conventions or the different things like that,
Absolutely.
and finding it somewhere else, is building something right at home.
Yeah.
And
right.
that's kind of what I've wanted for myself, is instead of worrying about the next, show, or
Right.
that I can do something here. And like you say, it is all about being creative, and that's what I like about the life. It's not standing on a pedestal or something like that and winning an award.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
It's more about, like you say, just being inspired by the things that you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And so that's really fortunate. I've been able to do something like that.
Yeah.
And, each piece is an important part of making that work together.
Yeah. Hey guys, in this episode I'm joined by Bryan Mark Taylor. He's a fine artist, illustrator, and art teacher known for his plein air and sci-fi paintings. He also founded an easel company called STRADA. In this episode we talk about his creative path, how he got his start, and the balance between technical skill and doing what you love. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Looks good.
Cool. Yeah, well, I appreciate you doing this, man. It's super cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for anyone that didn't watch the earlier episodes, Bryan was one of my first guests, and I really appreciate the support. And we're back for round 2 now.
Yeah. It's been what, a year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah, year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know, it is crazy.
Time flies. Well, I guess I've come up with like a little thing that I say at the beginning of every podcast, where it's like, the point of this is not to talk about how to become an artist, or like how you get a job, or any of that kind of stuff. It's more about like the why of it and trying to make it sustainable, And I think a lot of people, like, they don't even really care about working on specific projects or anything. They just care about like the ability to paint for a living, or the ability to just like be creative for a living, And when I look at you, it's like you've been able to make this, life for yourself, where you're able to like paint in your backyard and paint your goats and paint your ducks and paint your fruits that you grow yourself, while also having this like brand that you created, STRADA, where you sell easels and stuff, And I think it's incredibly inspiring to see like you be able to pull that off,
Well, I think I appreciate that. One of the things that I have really enjoyed is kind of the idea of, build it and they will come sort of idea, right?
Right.
Instead of kind of going off and chasing the conventions or the different things like that.
Absolutely.
And finding it somewhere else, is building something right at home.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I've wanted for myself, is instead of worrying about the next, show, or that I can do something here. And like you say, it is all about being creative, and that's what I like about the life. It's not standing on a pedestal or something like that and winning an award.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
It's more about, like you say, just being inspired by the things that you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And so that's really fortunate. I've been able to do something like that. And, each piece is an important part of making that work together.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people look at the idea of being an artist and having a family, or having, like being able to buy a house and have a mortgage and stuff, is something that's completely unobtainable,
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is just like making the proper sacrifices, doing the right things, like, doing your chores, eating your vegetables, doing all that stuff, and being patient,
Yeah.
Because like it is, from one perspective, like I mentioned this a lot, where everyone should, like, theoretically, no one should be an artist, everyone should be a lawyer or like a doctor or something, because it's like the better career,
Right.
But it's not like, it's cool to me that anyone's able to, like, you can make a career out of painting fruit, or make a career out of selling easels or something, and do just as well, if not better, than those people that went down the safer path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important that you realize that we are truly the architects of our lives, right? And that we don't have to kind of settle,
right?
If we're willing to kind of do something very different.
Yeah.
I think the thing that separates maybe, a path that an artist takes, and like a lot of people that kind of go down the safer road, is the willingness to be different.
Yeah.
And, like my neighbors around here, on either side of me, they're either doctors or lawyers, so I'm in a neighborhood full of people that kind of gone down that path, but and everybody kind of scratches their head and wonders what I'm doing,
Yeah, right. Well, and it's super cool, and it's not about the amount of followers you have. It's not about any of that kind of stuff. It's about like building a community of people. And often I hear from people that are like able to have a business that can take care of them. It's like, it's way more about looking like at your level versus looking up, versus where you can be.
Sure.
Trying to provide like a service to people instead of like trying to be the best person in the room,
Yeah, you'll drive yourself crazy if you worry about becoming famous or something like that, right? And it's not that much fun.
Yeah.
It's just like worrying about being the skinniest person or
absolutely,
have the biggest muscles or something, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So we try and seek those accolades instead of the actual thing that we enjoy, which is sitting. I love being alone and having hours of creative time.
Yeah, well, and
that's the best. That's the best part of the career is right there.
Absolutely. Well, it's like learning to like love your company, and learning to like be okay with yourself, because as an artist,
you have to live with yourself.
You're spending most of your time alone,
yes.
just creating and
exactly.
And I think it's like the same. Like you might be doing the same work that you were doing when you were 20 years old. It's just like at a different scale.
Yes.
And it's like if you can't learn to love the fundamentals of running a business or painting a picture or any of that kind of stuff, it's going to be very hard to learn how to do the very, very complex stuff that everyone wants.
Hey guys, I wanted to take a second to talk about the mentorships I have on Patreon. In the mentorships, you'll get 1 or 2 calls a month depending on what tier you sign up for, written critiques and draw-overs, and general art advice. Mentorship is something that I found personally really useful, and it saved me a lot of trial and error trying to figure out things on my own. If you're curious about it and want to test it out, I'm doing 20-minute free calls for anyone that might be interested. Just go ahead and reach out to me on my website and we can set something up. Thanks, and back to the video.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, it is about the base and the fundamentals. So there's a certain amount of, income stream that you need to have to survive, right?
Yeah.
And you want to find something that has that sustainable longevity,
right? That
you can do that so that you aren't worried each day about,
right?
The wolf coming and
absolutely
and eating you. And so, if you can create that base and then live within the means of what that is, then it's sustainable, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to make tons of money,
right?
You just have to be willing to fit your lifestyle in a way that. So, for example, one of the things that is the base of what I'm able to do is that I never run up a credit card debt.
Yeah.
I don't have debt.
Right.
So, that's one of the kind of the cornerstone to be able to have the creative life, right? And that's what enables artists to do what they do. Society has to have enough going on, taking care of all the basics that artists can exist in the first place, right? A certain amount of wealth. And there's certainly, like here in the US and other places in the world, there certainly is that kind of community. For example, even just the town I live in could theoretically sustain me, just this one town,
right?
Not to mention like, paintings going, all over the place. But if, like you say, instead of worrying about being famous, but being a part of your your own community, you have a great opportunity there. And so
absolutely,
that's so. For example, this coming week, there is all these poppies that were planted in the 1800s. And I posted this on Instagram. And I'm helping support this new park that is made here in Alpine, Utah. And what we're doing is just bring awareness to the beauty of this place. And it has kind of some old ruins of the house that was built there and Rose Garden. I think this guy's name's George Lambert, and his wife planted all these flowers, more than 100 years ago. And now it's kind of this beautiful park, and the city has gotten involved, and now I'm getting involved in it. And getting involved in your community like that can be a really awesome thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Well, it's like it's kind of ironic because like if you don't just by doing the things that you really care about, I think you become famous in some way. It's like I don't think you would have ever expected to have the amount of Instagram followers you have right now.
No,
right? It just kind of happened because you were doing what you really loved. And I think that like every single great thing starts out pretty modestly. Something like
absolutely.
Like something like becoming a painter might have started out in like an elementary school classroom with a teacher like praising a student's ability to paint a stick figure or something.
Right.
And then it just goes to the point where that person becomes Drew Struzan or something.
Yeah, totally.
And I think like part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is like it's like learning to talk to as many people as possible just to have like, faith in yourself essentially, because it seems like the more that you're able to lean into those things that you really truly care about, the more that people respond to it.
Absolutely.
And they actually start, like they actually become willing to, support you and, allow you to keep it sustainable,
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, it's interesting here because of kind of my unique path or whatever. I talked to one of the the council members and the mayor, and I'm hoping to have an imprint on the town and the way we design it and the architecture that's happening in kind of a new phase, because my expertise is, I travel around the world. I look at beautiful cities and towns, the world over, especially Italy. Italy's my second home. Yeah. But I want to take what I've learned from, creating that beautiful environment and, bring it right here in our town. And so again, just living that authentic life in a way that other people haven't been able to. Yeah. I've been able to see and do things that other people haven't been able to see and do, and hopefully be of use as well to my community. Right. So in fact, there's a property over here. They were going to build a retirement community in the riverbed, which is just nuts. Yeah. And so this winter I was worried about losing it, and so I started painting the whole area, and I got people involved in our community, and we kind of came en masse into the meeting, and we were able to kind of cancel that project because they're like, this is a beautiful part of our community, let's not ruin it. Right. And so I'm really kind of happy to see people kind of realize, oh yeah, we do live in a beautiful place. We don't want to just bulldoze this, and we want to make it nice. So ultimately, if you can kind of create that society or that kind of feeling within yourself, and people will definitely, because everybody's searching for it, right?
Absolutely.
Everybody's searching for it.
I remember it was either from like C.S. Lewis or something, Mere Christianity, or it was like you can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven pretty quickly. And it's like, you could look at something like a creek or something like your story, and it's meaningless. There's nothing I could do there. There's no way I could spend my time there that is actually helpful or cool or anything. And it becomes that you lose interest in doing it because you kind of kill your hopes before they can even begin. Yeah. And I think like someone's ability to see meaning in something that's relatively mundane, I think is actually part of the secret of success, And I think as artists, that's the only thing you're really providing is
we're providing a passion to an area or a thing that general people just aren't feeling it.
Yeah, they can't. You need to.
But as an artist, you're there to help. You have the sensitivity to see it for what it really is, right? And then your job is to help others see it.
Yeah, right? And the bravery too, and the bravery to be like, I know that like becoming like a forever student as a painter is a really common thing. Yeah. And the ability to step beyond becoming just a student and moving towards being like, oh, I am somebody that can finally say things. I am finally somebody who has the skills and the competence to be able to say something of value that will add, that will show people things that they weren't seeing before.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, I think that there's definitely the work that has to go into that. Yeah, right? The sacrifice, the self-sacrifice, and there's a lot of times where I had friends that would they'd be going skiing or on these trips and things like that, and I wouldn't be able to go because I had a deadline or something that I needed to do, especially early on when I didn't have as much control over my life as I do now. But the sacrifices I had to make early on, they pay dividends later, where you're able to do things that others can't do because they weren't necessarily willing to make those sacrifices early on.
Well, and the other side of that is like something like I talk about this a lot, where like eating an Oreo and watching cartoons can be the worst experience on the planet. Just mentally you're in the wrong place, whereas like running a marathon might be awesome. Like physically there are two different experiences. Like running a marathon sucks, like but it could be extremely fulfilling, whereas eating an Oreo is awesome, but it can also lead to in the same way that like you painting and working from one perspective could be extremely tedious and horrible, and skiing could be the flip side of that, you know.
And I think that's the ultimate thing, is that they were trying to escape their work. Yeah. And I was engaged and enjoying what I was doing. So ultimately, even though I was quote unquote working and they were playing, I think I was getting more fulfillment in the long run over what my choices, what I was doing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to the, like, if you really care about the thing you're doing, it's going to show in the work and you're going to do a lot better. And
absolutely,
it's like, I think it's all about like having like the idea of living for the weekend, I think, is the wrong way to live. Right. Right. We were like, you hate your job, but then you're so excited about your, like the end of the week to be able to do the things you really want to be doing. You know?
Right. Yeah.
And a question, I don't know if I asked this the last time we talked, but a question that I ask everybody is, would you be doing the same exact thing you're doing right now if you had $1 billion? And
yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't pay you to stop painting.
No,
you know? There's no amount of money, you know?
No. And it's interesting too, this idea of like retirement or anything.
Yeah.
I'm not going to retire. There's no,
you're always going to be doing it.
I would feel like I wouldn't have a purpose, you know? And,
right.
And so it's, you know, even talking with my dad, he loves, he took the doctor route, but he loves it.
Right.
And so here he is in his late 70s, mid to late 70s, and still is going to keep working. Yeah. You know, he's just fine. He just wants to keep going.
Keep doing it. Yeah.
Because he's enjoying it so much, and he's innovative and things like that. And so I definitely feel myself the same way. And so it's really a lifestyle. Like people keep asking me, why don't you paint portraits?
Right.
And I'm like, well, I have other interests, you know, like I mentioned, the gardening aspect. You know, we have the farm animals, and we have, you know, the flower beds and, you know, the fruits and all that stuff. Those are kind of things I'm really interested in. Yeah. I'd have to change my lifestyle if I decided to go down that path. Yeah. And maybe some people say, well, you need to do that to have, you know, a certain amount of fame or whatever. And that's where I make the decision. No, I'm about this lifestyle. Right. You know, the lifestyle is important to me. Yeah. Right. So even, I kind of backed off some of the, you know, attending big events and things like that too, because I've just found that I don't, you know, I'm okay building the thing that I've built, and I'm just kind of enjoying it. And people that come my way and come and see it and come participate in it is great. Yeah. And I don't need to keep going out there chasing whatever.
The ego and stuff.
The ego and and I know people, some people just really love that, maybe more extroverted, you know, and are interested in those kinds of things. But for me, I just, you know, I like, you know, thinking deeply about what it is that really truly is, you know, sustaining to me. And
absolutely. Yeah.
And interaction with nature is really one of the kind of pillars of that kind of motivate me. Yeah. You know?
Well, I see this a little bit in the art education community, where people become like a slave to art versus letting art be a thing that benefits their life, you know?
True.
It's like you're not just a painter, you're like a father and somebody's son, and you know, you're a member of this community, and you have other hobbies. You're, you know, growing these plants in your backyard and all these different things. And if you were to only be a painter, it's almost like you're giving up most of who you are, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I see this, like, you know, again, in the, like, people that are earlier on in their careers, they're giving 100% of everything to becoming a great painter, instead of like letting themselves be a hockey player or letting themselves be a, you know, whatever, you know? Mm-hmm.
And usually that informs your art if you need to have absolutely. Those things, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And so, you know, I've always been interested in, I'm very fascinated by and interested in the sustainability of farming in general.
Yeah, right.
And in crops and, you know, just issues that we have today, right? And part of that is my own little experiment in my house. Like, you know, I've seen the documentaries, I've read the books about beehive collapse, and so now we're raising bees so that I can understand at a very intimate level of why that's happening and what's so hard about keeping a hive alive. So that kind of stuff has really been fun and interesting and engaging beyond just the painting. But I'll also paint some bees. I will paint the honeycomb. I will, you know, and the flowers that we've planted because of all of that. Yeah. And so just by the extension of the way you're living your life, you know, you just, you know, those things just naturally occur together.
Absolutely. Well, I think people get caught up with what they should do versus what they want to do a lot of the time, you know? Yes. And I think that's actually counterintuitive to being like a professional artist, is that, like, again, going back to the idea that painting is a bad idea, you know, from a like macro level. I mean, I don't think it is personally, but like there's always there's a better should be doing, you know? Yes. Like, again, lawyer, doctor, you know, running for office somewhere or something. And and the only reason anyone I know ever has success is, like, I know a lot of people who sell prints at conventions, and they've made a really nice living for themselves and their family by, like, drawing anime boys, you know, which I think amazing, right? That's crazy, right? Yeah. And it's leaning into a very childlike, very, like, you know, the stuff they grew up with, you know? Yeah. And it's like, that's the the thing. Then being able to channel that energy is the reason they're able to make a product that people really care about and actually want to support them for.
Absolutely. Well, and that's something that's been really fun for me too, aside from, the plein air and the representational art that I do. I do some kind of fantasy, science fiction kind of stuff. Cool. And part of that is just a childhood, like rekindling that, that childhood love of art that originally started because of all of that. Yeah. And we have a bit of a community here, with authors like Brandon Sanderson, who's nearby, and we have several. I went to school with a group of authors that all became New York Times bestsellers.
That's so cool.
Which is really cool. Dan Wells is another one, and there's also another Brandon Mole. He lives here in Alpine.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. So there's quite a community of that kind of creativity too, and so it's been fun to be a little bit of a part of all of that as well. So it's just kind of a blend of fantasy and reality. Yeah. But it's really about being an architect, creating your myth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your myth and your story,
right? And
kind of just living it too.
Absolutely. And I think if somebody's caught up in, like if all you guys coming up together, we're focused on George Lucas and what it like. Unless I'm George Lucas, it's not worth it.
Right.
Then you might have been looking up too much to be able to see your own.
Yes.
Your own path.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, all these pieces I'm doing are eventually coming together as a book, and kind of an IP,
Yeah. Right.
And I've learned a lot just, associating with Brandon and others about the storytelling aspect and things like that, which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it really is, you can be the architect of your life, and it's just your passion feeding into it and that energy, instead of just maybe saying, like you said, I'm just going to watch the movies, those other guys that do it.
Right.
You realize they're the same as you.
Yeah. Like Star Wars started out as like a Flash Gordon ripoff,
Right.
And now it's one of the biggest franchises on the planet.
Right.
And
yeah, absolutely. It's just a regular old space opera.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and you look at people like somebody that I really admire as a director is Christopher Nolan. Just a brilliant director. Looking forward to Oppenheimer coming out soon.
Oh yeah.
But realizing, I was hearing him interview here, or Denis Villeneuve, another great director doing right now the Dune series, and I love what he did with the Blade Runner
and Star Trek and stuff.
Did a really great job. But those two directors kind of they're people that I respond to and with listening to their interviews and things like that, it's just all about caring, the way they care about certain things, and it's not necessarily has to be this genius thing, or
it's your taste, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I was listening to an interview from a famous music producer. I can't remember his name, but he was talking about the only thing he's paid for is his taste. He doesn't consider himself a great musical technician or anything. He's just like, I care about this and not this, and this is why.
Yes.
And he's very aware of why he cares.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
it is. So it's like your taste can be all kinds of different things, right? But cultivate it, improve it. Right. Expand on it. Make sure you know all the players in it. Those things that you're interested in.
Right.
And that's really where you'll go deeper.
Yeah.
Right. And I noticed that also with collectors too.
Yeah.
Some collectors never really engage with the artists they work with, but others will really engage with those artists and really learn about not only who they are, but who their peers are.
Yeah.
And I think they become better collectors, savvier collectors, because they are engaged at a deeper level with all these artists, get to know them, even take a class from them. There's a guy named Scott. I'm forgetting his last name. Scott Jones.
Okay.
Yeah. It is really great to see. He's one of the few gallery owners that I know who actually attend workshops. And really wants to understand how the art is made. And it just makes his ability to sell art just that much better.
Well, and the story of it is way more interesting too,
Yeah.
And I think it's like everything is nothing and everything all at once. It's just your ability to see it as something. Like an analogy I use is like you could look at those trees over there, and it could be like, you could turn that into a spear or a log to build a house, or a paddle, or any number of toys, or any number of things that it could be, or it could just be a tree.
Yeah.
And depending on who you are and what your sensibilities are, that tree is either any of those things or just a tree.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it like it comes down to like almost like a bravery or something, or just like a faith in
in yourself and what you believe and what you feel is important.
Right.
Yeah. And highlighting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that, one thing that's important too is that not only the ability to do that and see that, but to communicate it.
Yeah.
Learning how to communicate it.
Yeah.
So even with my kids, we have this kind of rule where we need to do 15 minutes of weeding every morning.
Yeah. Right.
And they hate it and stuff like that. But then I was describing to my oldest son, I was like, well, think about it. Look at when, as we create these things, look at all the paintings I've done over the years, just from what we've created in our yard. Yeah. And it was just kind of this eye-opening. Right. I didn't realize I didn't express that to him. He thought he was just weeding as a arbitrary chore. Yeah. And I'm like, there's a grand purpose in this. We're creating something beautiful that, people are enjoying all over the world as I make paintings of these, these things. So that's something that really, I need to communicate that. Right. And so I need to not only communicate that with my son, but also just with my community, with people that I interact with online, and make sure and communicate that love. And it's interesting. You see people come out of the woodwork, right? Yeah. Talking about they have those same feelings too. And that's where you kind of create that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I honestly, I think that's the only thing to do, is to share those ideas and try to see meaning in things that seem relatively mundane, Yeah. Because I think it's always easier to like watch TV or play a video game or something, but then being able to see meaning in something as relatively mundane as like pulling weeds, or when you think about it, like even painting is relatively mundane, where you're just putting strokes down.
Yeah, it could be seen as incredibly boring, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and having the like, I guess like ability to see something more in it, to like see the potential in it is I think the only reason anyone ever paints in general.
Yeah. There's definitely that kind of feeling as through the painting process, as something unfolds. Yeah. The thoughts and the story that comes along with all of that, and it keeps building over time, right, through the years.
Absolutely. Well, I'm curious, like, so when it comes to something like STRADA, like, how did that come about? Was it like?
Well, that's an extension of solving my own problems.
Yeah.
Right. Again, this idea of the world you're creating, and so I had a moment where I had an easel, right, that I took to Italy, and it fell apart. And over time, it just was rickety and just having some problems and things like that. And I was like, you know what, I can't go over to Italy and want to have this experience and not have things functioning how I want them to function. And so I wanted to make something indestructible.
Yeah, right.
So that if it falls over or the screws or knobs and things will still work. Yeah. And so that was kind of the idea. And, again, you look out in the market to see if there's somewhere there to solve your problem. And I just didn't see something that I could rely on because everything was mostly made out of wood. Yeah. And so I realized wood was kind of the problem there, because over time it kind of warps and it loses its strength, and the screws and knobs are also a problem. So anyway, just trying to solve that problem. And so one day I just went to my dad's, he has a kind of some saws and things in his basement. This is years ago. So I didn't have any, we were in California at the time. I didn't have room to have any of that kind of equipment, unfortunately, but it was over Christmas break, basically, where I was just getting involved in trying to start to design something just for myself. And then just slowly from there, as I kept tweaking and designing it, realizing, this needs to be, and this is the time about when the biography of Apple CEO.
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. That's about when the biography came out, right? Yeah. And anyway, I just realized, you're talking about aluminum, making a laptop. I'm like, this needs to be made out of aluminum. Yeah. And so a couple things just kind of came together, and then it was me about researching metal and what different metals do, and why do this metal over that metal, and so anyway, just slowly figured out my own problem, had it made for me, right? And this one was made for the first, the plein air convention that was over a decade ago, and I had my own, just one-off made for that weekend, and so people saw it there, and that's kind of where I was like, I want one of those. Right. So it kind of, I just made it for myself, but it kind of took off from there.
Absolutely. Well, I think from a more existential level, it's like almost like those problems. There are two ways of looking at them. It's like, oh, those are insurmountable obstacles that I can't solve, or they are the like, it's like a potential thing that's like manifesting itself to me to be able to, like, oh, I could do this. I could figure this out. You know? And
well, there's an aspect too that can be scary is the money that I had to put out to get this thing to have something manufactured is not cheap, right? And so you had to have enough belief that you're actually willing to put all your chips in to be able to do that. So there's a bit of part of that going back to that idea of belief in yourself.
Yeah. Right? Well, I also think it starts with like baby steps as well. If you were to put $100,000 into it from the start, that's the wrong way to go.
Right.
That is the wrong, like you doing it just like, I'm going to do this myself, build it in my dad's garage, all that kind of stuff. That's way easier and way more sustainable and way more accessible than putting in, $1 million into some crazy business idea, which is where I think a lot of people start. A friend was telling me about this other guy who, like a famous entrepreneur, I can't remember who it was, but he sold an app to Apple or something for a whole bunch of money. And people were talking to him at a conference and they were like pitching him as their ideas. And they were all like they were good ideas, but his advice was like, this is way too complicated, like operate at whatever level that you think you could do today versus like you need the help of other people to actually start even thinking about it.
Right. Yeah. There's that whole idea of ignition.
Yeah.
And I know that, I've kind of use the analogy of when you have a gym that's 5 miles away, the rates of people actually going to the gym are way higher than if it's 10 miles away.
Yeah.
Right. And so you want to reduce the friction as much as you can so that you can, start. Right. I have 10 other ideas that I know could be a good business, but obviously I don't want to do them because I've tapped out. I realized in terms of there's a certain amount where I like, I've got my lifestyle that I want. I'm going to kind of just sustain that. Right.
Absolutely.
But I already, I know how to do that. And, it's interesting. It's just it's a total mindset. It truly is.
Yeah. And it's like a time and energy thing,
Yeah.
And it's like that, and I think in some sense it's like an ego thing. Cause I think a big portion, like even now it might be a big portion of it might be like packing boxes and shipping stuff, whereas like somebody might not be willing to do that even from like a fledgling company or something,
right? And that there, I have to admit, with STRADA that was hard at first. It was just me, doing all the parts of it, and my wife, and it was a lot. It was a lot,
right?
And I was like, well, I want to be painting. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
So there's some moments where I was like, what am I doing here?
Right.
And so, I've gotten more wise about that and where I spend my time and how I spend it, and also hiring the help that we need so that we can be doing the things we want to do, Right. So that's even with like the farm, for instance, we have to have certain people to come help if we go travel.
Yeah.
Right. And I still want to travel. And so if we don't have people to help in those ways, and if I'm not willing to pay for that, then I don't get to travel.
Yeah. Right.
So you also got to be willing to, balance a lot of things in order to make your priorities. Yeah.
And I don't think it's ever easy either.
No, sometimes it can be really challenging,
really difficult and stuff.
And we just had a foreign exchange student living with us on top of everything else going on, and that has had its extra challenges too. I was pretty tired.
Well, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this because
no, absolutely.
Hours there it is.
No, but it's fun to sit back and talk every once in a while. Like stop and, like I say, sit on the roses. You can't always be working all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
It's good to kind of step back and do that. So, it's interesting while we're talking. It's interesting insights too that, from, things as you kind of review. How is your life going? Where is it going well? Where could it go better?
Yeah, right.
There's always those kinds of things where you could say, hey, I'm spending time on this thing that I don't want to spend time on. Right. Well, let's just let's remove it, even if it makes money or even if it fulfills you in some way. If it's not the main fulfillment that you have, just move it out of the way.
Yeah. I remember somebody saying once, and it really stuck with me, is like one of the biggest realizations you can have is that you could be anything, and the second biggest is that you can't be everything.
Yes. Right.
It's like you have to choose. You have to make those sacrifices.
Right.
Which I think is existentially very tragic.
Yeah.
You can't be an actor and a dancer and a doctor.
I wish you could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, that's, I would love to do sculpture. I love 3D and I've always loved that, but I just had realized that it's just too much to add everything else to add sculpture. So that's just one of those things where I have a friend, he's a great sculptor, and Ben Hammond, and I just go over to his place and just enjoy what he's doing. Yeah. And I just have to do that, and it's okay. Yeah.
Well, I guess it always comes back to just like leaning into who you are and being okay with that, and being like, okay, I'm not like, I have friends who are a lot better draftsmen than I am, and I'm pretty involved in the art community and stuff. And I have to be okay. Like, okay, I'm focusing way more time on like driving around the country and hosting a podcast and like seeing national parks rather than being like a great painter. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I was a much better painter. I wish I could dedicate more time to it. But just based on the nature of me, like choosing to do this over that, I'm making that sacrifice,
Sure. Yeah.
And like being okay with that is, I think, more so the struggle than anything else.
Yeah,
in some sense.
Absolutely. You have to realize that's okay.
Yeah.
That's absolutely okay. Yeah. And you're getting to see things and do things that other people aren't able to see and
absolutely.
do. I mean, think of how much you've seen of the US and abroad, and be able to, how many people would love to just jump in a van and not have a house tied down to all all the things that I'm tied down to, and to be able to just have that kind of freedom.
Yeah.
There's so many people that would just love that, but just, can't quite do it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And here you are, you're jumping in and you're doing it in a time and in a place, like you're seeing the opportunity here that YouTube and
absolutely.
Channels, these kinds of, podcasts gives you this ability to do that. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to own a radio station.
Yeah. I get to start.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Which is exciting that we have these opportunities, and I think it'll continue to increase.
Yeah.
I know people have been, a lot in the commercial art industry concerned about AI.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, and those concerns are valid.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so it'll be interesting to see what that does. Yeah. Ultimately, certainly it will affect jobs, no doubt about it.
Right.
But also it will create the new jobs, right? Yeah. Like being a podcaster, I mean, that was just not possible at all. Right. And now it's a viable line of work.
I'm a one-man production team, just
right.
Yeah.
Right. And how many are that are doing really well and enjoying it and able to travel and all of that?
Well, I think on the AI point, I think there's always some existential threat to what you're doing.
Truly.
Art, it's like photography came along, and then digital art, and then all this stuff. And I don't think really many people are commissioning giant cathedral paintings done anymore, or any of that kind of stuff. And I think something like being a painter is always evolving, and
absolutely,
whether it's like
somehow it's been able to hold on.
Yeah, somehow, and it's like the process of it, or selling, teaching or any of that kind of stuff. I think there's always a way to be a painter, and I think it goes back to the problem solving that you were talking about before, where you're like, you see how an easel could be better, and you throw your unique
idea into it.
Yeah. And
I mean, it is an extension of my identity. It's my thinking process, and the give and take that I've made. Every product has a give and take to it.
Yeah,
in terms of what you value, and it takes it in interesting ways, right?
Right.
But one thing, I've traveled extensively in Italy. I speak the language. I've lived there, and one thing I love to do in Europe in general is meet the artisans.
Yeah.
And there's craft that's been going on. Oh, it's in my family for 300 years or 600 years or, this.
Right.
And of course we can make all those things that they're making faster, cheaper, quicker, sometimes even better in a factory.
Right.
But people love the story, love handmade.
Absolutely.
And so at least my feeling about fine art, it's always going to have that.
Absolutely.
It's always that human element that, even though it can be done cheaper, faster, quicker, and printed out on paper, with AI or whatever, there's still this element where people want something
physical,
but they want the story around it.
Yeah.
It means something. And that could be olive oil. It could be salt.
Yeah.
It could be, just
paintings,
really paintings,
easel,
all those things.
Anything. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think so something like the Mona Lisa is not really a great painting. It's the most famous painting in the world, but it's not the best painting, ironically.
Right.
But it's famous because of the story and the history and everything around it.
Yes.
The cultural significance of it.
Yes.
That's the thing that makes it important.
And an artist is the same way too, right? Yeah. Somebody will buy your work because of who you are and the relationship and the connection they have with you.
Right.
And it doesn't have anything to do with, is this the best artist in the world?
Absolutely.
Right. It'll be because they have a personal connection with you.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to a friend about this who, again, does conventions. He was saying, like, when he first started out doing conventions, his first instinct when his work wouldn't sell was that he was a bad artist. Mm. It wasn't like, how he was presenting his prints or any of the story of it or any of that. But when he started working on the booth display and everything else, he started selling a lot more. Mm. So it wasn't actually the work. It was like, just how people empathized with him and his booth.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great insight for sure.
Yeah.
We think so much as an artist that technique, right? And it really is not about that so much as you're creating how you project your identity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How you project your story. And it really is a mythology.
Yeah.
That it doesn't always have to even be true.
Yeah.
Or rooted in reality in some ways.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned from some of these authors is that, and I love this statement that Picasso said, anything you can imagine is real.
Yeah. Right.
And so there is a certain level of that, that if you imagined it in a lot of ways, I'm not saying like go out and say you hike Kilimanjaro when you didn't do it.
Yeah. Right.
There's that people want it so bad that they lie to do it.
Right.
I'm not saying that necessarily, but there are things, the way you tell your story, the threads you bring out of the story are important to, be able to communicate with other people.
Yeah. Well, I've been paying attention to Brandon Sanderson's books for a few years now, like Mistborn and Way of Kings. I've read all the Way of Kings series and stuff.
Uh-huh.
I think part of the reason his stuff has become so, I love his stories, but I'm also paying attention to him just because he's become so iconic.
Sure.
I think he's become so iconic because he's so like archetypal in the way he talks about things. Mm-hmm. It's like the struggle of like Kaladin and Bridge 4 and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like I have friends that will like yell at each other, Bridge 4 and stuff.
Really?
Yeah. And it's like there's something about that struggle and that like that empathy that everyone feels, that everyone really resonates with that. Yeah, those character archetypes.
Well, and creating a massive community.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
Almost a mythos at the level of like Homer.
Yeah.
In terms of how many people it's affected.
Yeah, 100%.
It's staggering kind of to see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of, it's fun, it's exciting, and it makes the world more interesting. An interesting place to do that. And even his space, the way he's designed, his house and things like that, all add to that mythology.
Yeah. Right.
And it's not my place to say what's all there.
Yeah,
but,
totally understand.
It's a private thing, but he's really kind of made his stories into reality in a lot of ways.
Yes, absolutely.
Just like Lucas and others, right?
Yeah, right.
And people are constantly looking for new stories and new that relate to what we're going through today, that are unique and unique challenges.
Yeah. Well, I think on a more existential, like I think everyone, like you don't have to look far in anybody's life to find some horrible tragedy. It's like somebody's parents are sick or die or kids or whatever. And I think it's like the more empathy you can have for that, I think that like not money or anything, but the more content and like successful you'll feel as a person, like the more you're able to look at somebody who's, your idol and be like, oh, they're just a person, they're suffering as much as me. They just have a little bit more, I think that is a lot healthier of a path to walk down than, the wanting of their stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, right, it's your relationships that provide meaning to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy as an adult to go to Disneyland.
Right.
I would not enjoy the experience at all.
Yeah.
But if I go with my kids and just seeing it through their eyes,
context,
that's what makes it amazing. Yeah. And also, even reading a novel that might not be interesting to me, but reading it through the eyes of my child and see how they respond to it.
Yeah.
So those experiences of empathy are really everything. The essence of
absolutely
of enjoying your life and
and the story behind it.
Yeah. And I realize too, it's not traveling to Italy.
Yeah.
When I say Italy, it's the people I meet,
the
craftsmen, the shop owners, the conversations I have with them that are memorable. Those little moments are those are the things that
Absolutely.
I love so much about it.
Well, and the weird part to me about all that stuff is that you could travel to Italy or China or wherever and have the same exact experience you're having here if you choose to.
Yes.
You know? You can do the same exact things. And
yep.
I think part of the reason I do these trips in this van is because I'm inherently a pretty lazy person, but then having the like, oh, I'm in a Walmart parking lot, I can't stay here that long, you know?
Oh, sure.
I have to move. I have to keep doing these things. So it puts me in situations
where you have to move.
Yeah, where I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Where I'm, and like
that you wouldn't feel if you had a 9-to-5 desk job.
Absolutely, right? And I think it's like in the same way that like you could go on an adventure in your backyard. I've never walked 50 miles before, but I could walk 50 miles at home, and that's I would see everything that I see every day in just a new perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, it to me, that's a very strange thing, and it's that choice almost to try and see it in that perspective more so than anything,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree that you want to be able to have, put yourself in uncomfortable situations because I've noticed when I travel around from one Airbnb to the next,
right.
just what it forces you to do, even arranging your, the bathroom,
right.
Your ritual of brushing your teeth and all of that stuff. It's kind of a little bit different each time.
Yeah.
And having that experience, it just becomes more engaging, more interesting because it's not so familiar.
Yeah.
When things become super ultra familiar, they can get kind of mundane. And I guess that's why I do personally need to travel.
Yeah.
Because I go there to kind of put myself in that uncomfortable place.
Right.
And then I come back with a fresh perspective and also see the things around me in a fresh light, my backyard in a fresh light too. Because you don't want it to, it's easy. It's amazing our ability to get used to things.
How incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's why, the hedonistic treadmill, right? Getting the bigger house or whatever.
Yeah.
We absorb it and get used to it so quickly.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, to me, it's like the dark side and light side of being fulfilled. It's like you can be fulfilled by pursuing hedonism and bigger houses and all that stuff. But you can, it's very shallow inherently, Right. At the end of your life, you're like, oh, I have the biggest house, but no one cares,
Right.
Whereas if you pursue the light side, you're trying to connect with people and empathize and do things for people, like acts of service versus acts of selfishness,
Totally.
By the end of it, you're like, oh, that was pretty awesome,
Absolutely.
Totally worth it.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, I think, going back to Brandon Sanders is a good example of that. He has his own personal theater.
Right.
One of the best theaters in the country.
Oh, wow.
Rivals Lucas's.
Right. That's very cool to hear.
Yeah. But he lets people use it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not just his.
Yeah.
He, all his employees, he's just he's super generous type of person because he realizes that the reason to have this stuff is not to just,
to keep it, right?
It's to share and to be a part of it. And that's what I, hope to do too, with the things that I'm doing with the events that we kind of organize. I'm on the board of a art association that does programs for artists here in the community. Yeah. And so we organize plein air events to just come and paint. Right. There's no fee involved or whatever. We there's some really nice gardens that were made by a philanthropist. Yeah. One of the early people that did Microsoft.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
The Ashton Gardens. Yeah. And so we set that up as a come and paint, There's no fee or anything with it. And it's just a lot of fun, instead of turning it into some commercial venture, which can kind of ruin the whole fun of it.
Yeah. Well,
let's just make it something that's inclusive. Anybody can come.
Absolutely. Well, and things come from that just organically as well.
They do.
Yeah. It's kind of weird how
people you meet and absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the impulse to try and make everything I understand the impulse because people have to pay bills, but then the finding the balance between trying to make things commercial and doing things because you really want to keep it going is, I don't think you can do things like that until you've reached that sustainability,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You do need that's a pillar, right? That you need to have in your life in order to be able to do some of these other things. Yeah. It's not possible if you don't have, you may have all the best intentions in the world, but
absolutely
you need to have that kind of architecture around you to be able to start doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, it takes a certain amount of the all those things that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be able to get there, and the kind of the choices that you make, and the sacrifices you make for it.
Yeah.
But it's like some of these authors, like they wrote 10, 20 books before they got published.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah. And so it was during that time of the self-doubt and trying to work through all that.
I'm in that phase right now where I'm like, yeah, a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, where you don't know, where maybe you haven't had something hit in a way that you need it to.
Yeah. Right.
And so you're still kind of keep searching, keep looking for it, and the moment will happen because you're engaged in the path that can do that. Yeah. You're doing something atypical from what other people are trying to do.
Right.
Yeah. And so a lot of a cousin I have, he's like, I wish I could come up with some ideas or things like that. But the problem is, in a lot of ways, if you're living just the regular life that everybody's living, you're not going to come in contact with something unique or new. Yeah. For me, like a lot of these ideas that I've had that could start as other businesses or things are because I went to India. Yeah. And I saw this thing that we don't have here, like in the US at all, but it's this major thing there, that kind of stuff where it's because I've gone out, I found myself in the middle of absolutely nowhere and saw something kind of unique and interesting and wonderful. So it's that kind of stuff that you do have to do. What you're doing is go on that unique path. And who knows what you'll rub shoulders against,
One, I think even on like a more personal level, like when you're doing a painting, I suspect, I don't suspect a lot of painters really visualize every aspect of the painting before it's finished.
Oh, it'd be boring.
Yeah, it's like you're like reacting to stuff as you're painting. You put down a stroke and that leads to another stroke, which leads to a really interesting thing, or a not so interesting thing. And it's all about like the push and pull and like doing it and figuring out like where you end up on the process, like the journey before destination stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like the journey of painting is the way you make interesting paintings, not like knowing exactly what you're going to do before it starts.
Well, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah. As long as it describes that moment in time, it's unique and sincere. Yeah. It doesn't have to be because sometimes technical perfection ruins the authenticity of, and that's why, modern art was born out of, and Picasso and others, because it was getting so insincere in terms of the craft and things like that. That's why we kind of all of a sudden divided, and we're now in a multiverse of different art styles, just because of sometimes the failings or the insincerity of a certain style. It becomes trite after a time.
Yeah. Did you ever see those letters between Degas and Bouguereau?
No, I haven't seen
so
those.
But
I can imagine what that was like.
I think it was Degas. It was one of those guys, but it was like Degas applied to be in his gallery in Paris. I can't remember the name of it, but the very famous
the Beaux-Arts.
That I think it was that one.
Okay.
He applied to Bouguereau and was like, "Hey, can you let me into this?" And Bouguereau replied, "I would, but you never finish your paintings." Oh. And then Degas replied, "Well, you never start yours." And I was like, it's like
trade some barbs. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think
there's truth in both of those.
Yeah, there's truth in both of those. I really admire both those paintings. Sure. But like as I'm becoming more mature and I'm starting to admire people like Degas and all those people a lot more than I did before, because there's a lot more.
It's not just about the slick polish.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're younger, you get attracted to the slick polish and stuff like that. But it's a lot like a B blockbuster movie. Like, the next Indiana Jones might be that way. Who knows?
I'm still excited for it.
Well, it's an iconic character, right? Yeah. But anyway, it's interesting that all the explosions, the special effects, and things can't cover if the story is not if there's not a heart to the story. And we all know that that. You could spend $300 million on a project
and it fails. Yeah.
And it fails because of the story.
Yeah.
And so, it really has to come back down to that. It always has to be the bedrock. Right. It has to be in this kind of sincere perception, experience, and willingness to go out on a limb for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I was going to mention that.
Low budget movie.
Yeah.
Right. And there's one famous actor there.
Yeah.
But by no means this was supposed to be, the best movie of the year. Yeah. Right. And, it just had the heart.
Yeah.
and the idea is not original either.
Yeah.
The multiverse has been done like with Marvel's had a
for decades, right?
Had a ton of cracks at it, right?
Yeah.
And so it just had a lot of heart, and it had a core.
Yeah, the empathy and
the
stuff.
empathy in it. Yeah, that was very real.
Yeah.
And very much like my experience in going to China.
Yeah.
And just some of the things that they had about their family and understanding, with friends that have, American-born Chinese, the background and things like that. And
I'm Chinese as well. Yeah.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah. But and so that really resonated with me because it was so spot on.
Yeah.
Not necessarily all the fantastical stuff. Of course, that was.
It was cool.
It was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was a core there.
Right.
That resonated.
Yeah, I remember Colin Farrell talking about that movie, and he was talking about how the scene with the rocks made him cry.
Oh, really?
And how that was like the part of the movie that stood out most to him. Not like the crazy effects. It was these two rocks, standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon talking.
Yeah.
And it's like the only reason to have skill is to communicate like more complex ideas, but painting is just like a form of communication, I think, in the same way writing is,
Right.
And it's just like the emotion you're trying to convey is the most important thing, not the flashy brush strokes or technique or any of that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And of course you get involved in that early on in your career, and then you start realizing there's more to it, there's more depth, and there's more
absolutely
interest in to uncover there.
Yeah.
And that ultimately leads down a much more interesting path.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here, let me see what I've been going for. Just going for about an hour or so.
Okay. Want to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to tell people how to follow you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, online if you want to.
No, right through the camera?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. You could, what do you want me to say?
Hey, I'm Bryan Mark Taylor.
I am Bryan Mark Taylor, and you can follow me on Instagram or any of the social media. BryanMarkTaylor.com is my website.
Yeah.
Also, STRADAeasel.com is we talked about the STRADA product.
Yeah.
And then SentientAcademy.com is online art learning. That's where my lessons are, and other great artists as well. Yeah. So nice. Give it a follow. Thank you. Appreciate that.
By the way, I've been using your easel for since you gave your tripod.
Oh, that's awesome. So happy to hear that.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.